Well, I am so proud and privileged to welcome each and every one of you to what may be the greatest superstar gala dinner of any Jewish organization in history that we've ever had. You're all part of history now. Welcome to the Academy Awards of the Jewish world. ZOA will be handing out Jewish Oscars throughout the night. But they won't look like Uncle Oscar. Maybe Uncle Moish, I'm not sure. I'm so honored to be among you. You are among the most devoted and committed Zionists of Israel lovers and supporters and defenders anywhere in the world. I truly believe if proud and courageous pro-Jewish activists like you would have existed in the U.S. in the 30s and 40s, world history would have been far different, certainly Jewish history, and I would have had the grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins that I lost. But some of us, especially ZOA, have learned some important lessons from that time, and that is never again dare we be Jews of silence, never again dare we be Jews of silence. This is a uniquely special, extraordinary Jewish night. Tonight, we are commemorating the 100-year anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which picked up on God's promise, and the 50-year reunification of Jerusalem, which picked up on God's promise. And we're celebrating the 120th anniversary of the establishment of the Zionist Organization of America, which picked up on Herzl's promise. 100 years ago, before Britain would issue the Balfour Declaration, Britain required Zionist Jewish leaders to obtain prior consent from France and the U.S. ZOA President Louis Brandeis, he led the successful campaign as president of ZOA to obtain Woodrow Wilson's prior approval of the Balfour Declaration, which resulted in Britain issuing that important declaration on November 2nd, 1917, favoring the creation of the Jewish homeland. The Balfour Declaration was ultimately incorporated into the League of Nations mandate, one of the binding international agreements affirming the Jewish people's legal right, not to mention religious and historical right, to the land of Israel. And other ZOA presidents like Abba Hillel Silver led the U.S. fight by going to the United Nations and demanding the reestablishment of the State of Israel as the president of the Zionist Organization of America. ZOA in the late 40s was the only organization that was supporting the reestablishment of the State of Israel. All the others were worried about dual loyalty. It's in the biographies of President Truman that ZOA was the only one pushing for this. And just like today, ZOA is the only major organization to have opposed Oslo, to have opposed the Gaza withdrawal, to have supported the right of Jews to live anywhere they want in Judea and Samaria. We're the only organization today of significance that opposes a Palestinian terrorist state and opposing any more unilateral concessions to Abbas and his racist, bigoted, Jew-hating terrorists. No more concessions. And ZOA is proud that Justice Brandeis is part of our storied history, and we follow his dictum and advice. He urged, read and master the facts, and you will be able to overcome the indifference and the opposition which surround you. That's what ZOA does today. 120 years after our founding, much of our work continues to be providing the facts. On college campuses, through our campus division, through our Law and Justice Center, to Congress, through our Office of Government Relations, to the media, communities, and the American public, through speeches, articles, and media appearances, through our Israel office, and through our new training program for millennials on Israel advocacy, which is called Fuel for Truth. We're now training many kids in their 30s. And we bring hundreds of students to Israel twice a year, in part through the vision and generosity of Myron Zimmerman, and we are the only Jewish organization that I know of that brings those people past the 67 lines. We have made we've been very effective in many areas. We're the ones who got Congress and the Department of Education to change the interpretation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act for the first time to include Jewish students, not just other minorities. We have filed lawsuits under Title VI against many universities. We're fighting BDS. We're fighting anti-Israel sentiment on campus at Irvine, Berkeley, Rutgers, Michigan, Kent State, Brooklyn College, and many, many others. We at ZOA have been effective in stopping single-handedly anti-Israel candidates for important government posts. ZOA stopped Israel ambassador Charles Friedman from being the head of the National Intelligence Director. He complained about us on CNN that ZOA did this. We stopped John Roth of the Holocaust Museum from being appointed the head of research there, a man who publicly compared Israeli policies to Nazi policies. ZOA stopped him. We stopped Joseph Zogby was appointed by Martin Indyk to be his top aide. He had many, many horrific anti-Israel writings. After our campaign, within 3 weeks, Joe Zogby resigned from that position. And when Salam al-Mariyati was appointed nominated to be on the National Commission on Terrorism, we pointed out that he's called for Israel's destruction, has praised Arab terrorist groups. Within weeks of our campaign, his nomination was rescinded because of the Zionist Organization of America. There are many falsehoods being perpetrated in the world against Israel. I'll only mention one. Besides apartheid, that Jerusalem is holy to Muslims, a total falsehood. It's this nonsense of occupation. Is there really a real occupation now? Israel has given away all of Gaza, 40% of Judea and Samaria. That's where 98% of the Palestinians live. They have their own parliament, schools, textbooks, newspapers, radio stations, TV, business, police force. There is no occupation. This was never their sovereign land. And if it was their sovereign land, how could that be that they would have named it Palestine, a Roman name, not an Arab name? We are the only significant organizations making it clear on Congress and to the media and in public speeches that there is no occupation. This is holy Jewish land. It has never been sovereign Arab land. And let me just tell you, during the blessings that God has given Israel, during the horrific worldwide recession of 2008, Israel remains strong and unscathed. Israel has more patents than Russia, India, and China combined. Do you believe that there's a God? Yes, of course. Warren Buffett publicly proclaimed he invested $5 billion in Israeli businesses, not to help Israel, but to make money. Mark Zuckerberg, after visiting Israel, said he has never seen such an extraordinary array of scientific engineering and computer talent as he's seen in Israel. Israel's economic growth is among the highest in the world. They have an overflow of young people waiting to join the IDF, especially elite units. In poll after poll, Israelis are among the happiest and most satisfied people in the world. Thank God Almighty for blessing the Jewish state of Israel. And I will end, as I've done sometimes, on the 69th anniversary now of the Jewish state of Israel. We who care about and love the Jewish state of Israel, we must continue to believe in miracles. Because who would have believed, and even though Israel was the David and the huge Arab world was the Goliath, that we, the Israeli Jewish public, would win the wars in 48, and 56, and 67, and 73, and 82. It was a miracle. Who would have believed that Israel, which began with 600,000 Jews 69 years ago, would today have a population of almost 7 million Jews? It's a miracle. Who would have believed that Israel, which had only 6% of the world's Jews 69 years ago, now has almost half of the world's Jews living in Israel? It's a miracle. Who would have believed that Israel would have made the desert bloom? And just as our Torah, the Holy Bible, promised, the Bible says the Holy Land will remain barren Nothing will grow until the Jews return. And for God's sakes, that's just what happened. It's a miracle. The story of Gush Katif proves it. The land the Arabs called accursed in Gaza. When the Jews came, the Arabs said, don't try to build anything, grow anything. Nothing grows here. But in fact, when the Jews grew there, it yielded at one time most of the agricultural exports to Israel. And when the Jews left, the land became useless again. Even the insects participated. The vegetables that had been once famously bug-free began to develop bugs under Arab oversight. The thriving business of Gush Katif languished in the hands of the Arabs. Even the managers who worked under the Jews had all the expertise, could not do it. Why? The land did not cooperate. Because God controls history. The Bible said the land will remain barren until the Jews return. That's what happened. It's enough to make you late to fill in and keep Shabbos. There really is a God. Human beings would never have written that. Because human beings would not have risked writing that, because if non-Jews came and the land flourished, then the Bible would be a lie. Only God would have such a thing in the Bible, because he controls history. Who would have believed that Israel would go from the agrarian economy to become one of the world's leading leaders in microchips? Who would have believed that the Jewish state would have more scientists per capita, who publish more scientific papers per capita, have more musicians and orchestras per capita than any country in the face of the earth? That's a miracle. And who would believe that the Jewish state would produce over a dozen Nobel laureates, the highest percentage per capita of any country in the world? And who would believe that we now have more students studying in yeshivas in Israel than at any time in Jewish history? And who would believe that Orthodox Jews would make up 40% of the officers in the Israeli army? It's extraordinary. And who would believe that for the first time in history, the first time, a country would bring black people to its shores, not to be slaves, not to oppress, but to be a free and proud people? That country is Israel, and that is extraordinary, and we should be proud of it. And who would believe that after 2,000 years of dispersion, there are now 400,000 Jews in the holy city of Jerusalem, and 450,000 Jews in the holy land of Yehuda and Shomron, given to the Jewish people by the Lord our God, King of the universe, that after 2,000 years, we Jews have sovereignty over all the historically holy Jewish city of Jerusalem, never to be divided again, and that is a miracle. In every generation, as the Passover Haggadah foresees, enemies will rise up against the Jewish people, but each time we Jews will overcome our enemies and prevail. We have always emerged to rebuild and prevail. We've always emerged stronger than before. In future years, I believe, will be a time of regeneration, hope, new opportunities, and stronger Jewish communities in Israel. The Torah promises that Israel is the Jewish homeland. The Torah promises that the Jewish people will be an eternal people. And unlike politicians, God keeps his promises. And remember, we Jews did not come to Israel as colonialists. We came neither like the British imperialists, nor like the French colonizers in Algeria, nor like the English and Dutch settlers in South Africa. We Jews did not come like the emigrants seeking a new continent, a new homeland. We Jews came back to our ancient homeland, given to us by God Almighty. We were the inhabitants of this country who had been driven away from it by force. This is our sovereign homeland. We must never forget that and never be silent about that. And I will end by saying, the book of Yehoshua says, be not afraid, be of good courage. And wherever we go, God is with us. And with the help of the Christian Zionists, with the help of the Jews around the world, with the help of the Israel Defense Forces, and with the help of Almighty God, we will thrive and flourish and defeat all of our evil and wicked enemies, and we will prevail as no other country ever has. Thank you so very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
This Justice Louis D. Brandeis Award is presented to Iris and Shalom Maidenbaum for your lifelong advocacy and commitment to Zionism and the well-being and security of Israel and the Jewish people. You are an inspiration and example for all of us to emulate. It is at this event of the Zionist Organization of America, Mort Klein, National President, Michael Goldblatt, Chair, November 12, 2007, 23 Cheshvan, 5778, Mazel Tov.
Thank you.
Whoa, heavy.
So why did we accept this award? ZOA and Mort Klein's outspoken, unambiguous, and unapologetic positions on the issues that face our beloved Israel resonate loudly and clearly with us, providing a clarion call for our future endeavors. We hope to inspire, as we have been inspired, to encourage students and friends of Israel, Jews and our non-Jewish friends alike, to be proud Zionists. Israel is not just a nice place to visit, not just an economic powerhouse, not just a powerful military force, not just Jews defending our homeland, and not just a leader among scientific, medical, and technological startup nations. Israel is now and will always be a place where Jews are able to arrive freely and be counted among the most civilized countries in the world, the proverbial light unto the nations.
We live in increasingly dangerous times. Around the world, we're seeing the left turn further and further and further to the extreme left, whether it be in Great Britain, with the head of the Labour Party being someone who is virulently anti-Zionist and who tolerates anti-Semitism, whether it be on American universities, which routinely ban pro-Israel speakers and invite the most excessive anti-Israel speakers, whether it be in the Antifa movement, whether it be in Black Lives Matter, which singles out only Israel, calls it genocidal and apartheid. This is an extreme danger because it presents the possibility of a future which would replicate what's going on university campuses today unless we can stop it. We're also seeing many people on the right, particularly in Eastern Europe, turning to the extreme far right, particularly in countries like Poland and Slovakia and Hungary and other places. And in the United States, though the numbers are small, people who follow extremists like David Duke. Historically, Jews have been trapped between the red and the black, between the extremes of communism, the red, and the extremes of fascism, the black. Extremism has never been a virtue to the Jewish community or to its nation state. Centrism, whether it be liberal or conservative centrism, conversations between centrist liberals and conservatives is a far more productive way of engaging in dialogue. We must become united in defense of Israel rather than divided. And difficult as it may be, Israel must remain a bipartisan issue. I remain a Democrat because I refuse to give up on the Democratic Party. I refuse to turn over support of Israel to only one party. I urge those of you who are conservative and Republicans to remain within your party and make sure that your party, which has done a far better job of ridding itself of anti-Semitic and anti-Israel extremism, maintains that position. And so I'm here today because Chris Ruddy represents a sensible, centrist, conservative approach. He can talk equally well to centrist liberals and centrist conservatives. He understands points of view on both sides. Chris is brilliant, an innovative businessman, a great journalist, an influential advisor, and of course, we're here today because Chris is also a fervent Zionist who loves the nation state of the Jewish people and who loves the Jewish people. there could be no more appropriate award for Chris Ruddy than the Mort Zuckerman Award, because their lives in so many ways parallel each other. Mort was a great journalist and a great entrepreneur, and somebody who combined journalism and entrepreneurship. And that's what Chris has done. I've known Mort Zuckerman for almost 50 years. I've known Chris Ruddy for less time than that, but our relationship has become very close and very mutually beneficial. And so, to me, of all the qualities that Chris has, and there are so many, the one quality that really shines above all others is Chris is the personification of a mensch. And so, it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and my colleague, Chris Ruddy.
When I was 19 years of age, I first went to Israel as a student. I studied at the Hebrew University. I'm a Roman Catholic. I'm a Christian Zionist. I believe strongly. I realized, and Mort and I were chatting about this before this award in the past week, and I said, you know, what's more important, that we have a fair and balanced media in this country, or that we could defeat all the enemies against the state of Israel? The greater threat is not the enemies. Israel's always going to have enemies. It's always going to have bad guys surrounding it. But we need to have a media that's fair and balanced, that gives the side of the story of Israel. So my mission as a journalist has always been to give the American people the other side of the story, to give them facts and information that they're not getting. And so much of what we hear about Israel, we're not being sort of given the fair shake. We know that Israel is under threat for its very survival from people like Iran. Iran has vowed for the annihilation and destruction of the Jewish state. And I think, if anything, we here as a group, Jews and Christians, must be united about in supporting our president in his efforts to protect Israel and keep America's only democratic state.
I'm proud to be here with ZOA's extraordinarily committed, knowledgeable, and just relentless supporters and defenders of Israel. These are ZOA's professional campus coordinators working throughout the country.
As the managing director of the campus department, I would like to thank the Zionist Organization of America and the Myron Zimmerman Foundation for providing us with a platform to recognize and honor outstanding Zionist, pro-Israel student achievement and leadership on campus. Tonight's two honorees could not come from more distinct backgrounds. Natan Ben Shimol and Heather Alper, while hailing from different Zionist upbringings, have both demonstrated incredibly effective and meaningful Israel advocacy and are serious assets to ZOA campus and the pro-Israel continuity as a whole. Well done, Heather and Natan. We salute you both. Keep up the great work.
As a proud Zionist feminist, I want to say that we have a place in whatever social justice movement you can think of, because Zionism is a liberation movement at its core. Take that, Linda Sarsour.
The students that are here and that are not here are basically representing Israel every day on their campuses. Some campuses are easier, some campuses are harder, but they really deserve a huge round of applause.
Dr. Wu has generously endowed the brand new Wu Kai-sheng Lifetime Achievement Award, named after his incredible grandfather, a humanitarian giant and a great friend of the Jewish people. And I have to say a few words about Wu Kai. When I looked him up and read about him, tears came to my eyes. When the whole world closed the door to Jewish people, Shanghai was the only exception. In fact, Myron Zimmerman was born in Shanghai. At that time, Shanghai was also undergoing the flames of war, but this city, though millions of miles away from Europe, this city sheltered more than 20,000 Jewish people during the Holocaust. Especially after Kristallnacht, Shanghai almost became the only city in the world that opened its doors with a full heart to Jewish people. Shanghai was called by Jewish refugees the Oriental Noah's Ark. During the war, many Shanghai people reached out their helping hand to their Jewish brothers. The most famous lawyer in Shanghai at that time was Bruno Wu's grandfather, Wu Kai-sheng. He was one of the people working to save Jews. He played an important role in this extraordinary rescue. When the Nazis in Germany began to launch anti-Semitic movements in the 30s, Wu Kai-sheng was full of anger at such monstrous violations of human rights. Wu Kai-sheng decided to do everything he could to help the Jewish people who sought asylum in Shanghai. As the most famous lawyer in Shanghai, Wu Kai-sheng had good personal relations with government officials, consulates of different countries, merchants, military generals, and even the local gang leaders. Wu Kai-sheng utilized these relations he had to help Jewish people in every way. Wu Kai-sheng helped Jewish refugees who had just arrived in Shanghai. He helped them get permanent residence permits. He offered legal advice to Jewish people for free. He helped Jewish people get business licenses, and he himself financed those who were in need with his own money. After the Japanese army, yes, an unsung hero. After the Japanese army took over Shanghai in 1937, the situation of Jewish refugees in Shanghai became even tougher. Mr. Wu had to cope with Japanese invaders and the puppet regime of Wang Jingwei in order to protect Jewish refugees against Japanese troops. As an important lawyer, Mr. Wu helped hundreds of Jewish refugees get visas and ship tickets to the U.S. He risked his own life to escort them through the blockade of Japanese troops. After the war, Mr. Wu was still remembered and honored by many, many Jewish people as the guardian angel from China. And now I ask Senator Joe Lieberman to join Dr. Wu and myself. Joe Lieberman is the first recipient of the ZOA Wu Kai-sheng Lifetime Achievement Award for extraordinary work fighting for Israel and the Jewish people. And we are deeply grateful to Dr. Wu to honor his grandfather, an unsung hero, who I only recently became aware of, who risked his life, did everything he could as a non-Jew to save Jewish people. What an extraordinary man Dr. Wu's grandfather was. It's Dr. Wu's and my great pleasure to introduce someone and honor someone familiar to everyone, former Senator and Vice Presidential candidate Joe Lieberman. Senator Lieberman is a graduate of Yale Law. He became the Attorney General for the state of Connecticut. Senator Lieberman's distinguished himself in a 24-year-long career in the Senate as an unrelenting friend of Israel, as a powerful moral and ethical voice of sanity, and a warrior against radical Islam and the dangerous human rights abusing dictators in the Middle East. We recall how Senator Lieberman, in the teeth of great opposition from within his own party, supported President Bush's surge to prevent radical Islamic terrorists from taking over Iraq. And it worked. Thank you, Dr. Lieberman, Senator Lieberman. He is someone who always understood that we dare not grant victory and safe haven to terrorists who seek to harm us. He is a former chair of the Senate Committee of Homeland Security, Senator Lieberman played a key role in creating this very important department. Joe Lieberman is someone who understands the horrific dangers that face Israel and the U.S. and the West as a result of the horrific pro-Iran nuclear deal. He has served since 2015 as the chairman of the United Against Nuclear Iran group, which is dedicated to preventing Iran from becoming a regional superpower possessing nuclear weapons. I remember Senator Lieberman's powerful monologue, taking apart Secretary Kennedy's, Secretary Kerry's arguments for the Iran deal in a meeting Jewish leaders had with Kerry that I was privileged to attend. And unlike me, he did it without notes. Joe Lieberman is someone who has demonstrated in his career a willingness to be unpopular in order to speak the truth and take moral positions consistent with that. He was the first Democrat to publicly challenge President Clinton for his poor judgment in the Lewinsky episode. He was key in drafting legislation to reshape FEMA to more effectively respond to catastrophic and terrorist attacks. He now serves as the Lieberman Chair of Public Policy and Public Service at Yeshiva University. He has served as the co-chair of the Blue Ribbon Panel on Biodefense. And among his many books that he has written, The Gift of Rest, Rediscovering the Beauty of the Sabbath, is a book which has personally touched and inspired me, and I recommend everyone to read a book inspiring Jewish practices and Jewish traditions. I believe Senator Lieberman was the conscience of the Senate. And throughout his life, Senator Lieberman has been a model of probity, decency, and integrity, and I am thrilled with Dr. Bruno Wu to present to Senator Lieberman the Wu Kai-sheng Lifetime Achievement Award. Senator Joe Lieberman.
So the Zionist organization was founded in 1897. It was the first pro-Israel American political organization in the age of modern Zionism. But as you know, Zionism began a long time before that. About 4,000 years before that, in the covenant that God entered with Abraham. You might say that God was, in fact, the first Zionist. And to pick up from something my dear friend Chris Reddy said, Abraham was probably the first recipient of the Profile and Courage Award. Because think about it, he took on the idolatrous establishment of the day and uphold what we now call monotheism. God saw that Abraham's heart was loyal to him. He entered the covenant and he called on Abraham to leave his family, leave his land, and go to the land of Israel, where his descendants would become a great people. As Dr. Masrick said at the beginning, yesterday in synagogues around the world, we read the story of Abraham acquiring the first Jewish title to land in Israel, the cave of Machpelah, in what is now Hebron, for the burial of his beloved wife Sarah. And I think in this combination of events, we see the paradigm for behavior that the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, establishes. God gives us values, God gives us capacities, God gives us the power to dream, but ultimately it's up to us to use all of those to make those dreams come true. In our time, in a way that spoke loudly to my generation, President Kennedy said in his inaugural address, we ask God's blessings, but we know that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own. For long periods of history, That work sustained a Jewish state in Israel. And for other long, sadder periods of history, after the destruction of the first and second temples, Jews were stateless, most recently for almost 2,000 years. And then at the end of the 19th century, Theodor Herzl began the modern Zionist movement, and shortly after, the Zionist Organization of America was formed as an important part of that movement. Those modern Zionists were driven by the vision of God's promise to Abraham, but they were also driven by their all too realistic fears about what would soon happen to Jews in Europe. Modern Zionism was idealistic, but it was also very political, because the modern Zionists understood that without involvement and influence in politics, they would never, world politics, national politics, they would never be able to reestablish a Jewish state of Israel. Modern Zionism was led by Jews, but it would never have succeeded without the support of non-Jews, Christians, like the great Christian Zionists you are honoring here tonight. And so, to make a long, historic, often frustrating, but ultimately triumphant story short, Israel, the Jewish state of Israel, was reestablished in 1948, and today it has matured into a strong, diverse, economically vibrant, culturally rich, modern nation. But here's the lesson that I take from the history I have just briefly recounted. There is no guarantee that the Jewish state will continue to exist and grow. It will only do so if people like those in this room and others like us in Israel and around the world work together to support Israel, to protect Israel. It is in that spirit of continuing responsibility that I accept this award tonight. And I want you to know, I do it with a sense of real confidence, because it's hard to look around this room tonight, strong, numerous, diverse, passionate, committed, without feeling confidence in the future of the U.S.-Israel relationship and the future security of the Jewish state of Israel. Am Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel lives and will live with our help and God's help forever.
It is really my honor to be here tonight to introduce His Excellency David Friedman, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel. Ambassador Friedman is someone who has always been known for speaking forthrightly and honestly about complex events. After becoming an ambassador to Israel, he spoke plainly and truthfully about the obstacles that must be overcome for peace to occur in the Middle East, and most recently, he found himself at the center of controversy when he used the term alleged occupation when he spoke about the territories of Samaria and Judea. He was correct in using the term alleged. There is no occupation, because Samaria corresponds to the ancient kingdom of Israel, which was known then as the Northern Kingdom, and Judea corresponds to part of the ancient kingdom of Judah, also known as the Southern Kingdom. But you know, even if you're not a student of history, the name of the land, Judea, should tell you something. It gives you a clue who owned that land. The Jews owned that land. God that gave that land to the Jews, it isn't occupied land, it is Jewish land. It is our land. And what a refreshing development to have a U.S. ambassador who finally speaks openly and factually about Israel to world leaders and to the media. And because of his integrity, his honesty, and his courage, I am pleased to present Ambassador Friedman with the Dr. Bob Shillman Award for Outstanding Diplomacy. Mazel tov to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. And thank all of you so much. I have some prepared remarks that I'm going to share with you, but before I do, I want to tell you something that happened a few hours ago. So I don't know how many of you have a family chat on WhatsApp. It's a great little device to keep in touch, and as our family, thank God, has gotten bigger and bigger, we have this family chat. And with the press of time, it's hard for me to really pay attention to it. So many things are on there. Kids want to ride to the grocery store, who's going to the gym, who's going to school. I noticed something today from our youngest daughter, Katie, who's on a class trip. And I clicked on it because I wanted to see how she was doing on her trip. And I saw something that made me stop and really, I almost had chills when I saw what she sent me. It was a picture of our youngest daughter, our 15-year-old daughter, wrapped in a flag of Israel, standing on the railroad tracks at the entrance of Auschwitz. She was on a class trip with her fellow classmates through Poland. And I said to myself, no picture better represents who we are, or what we are fighting for, than that picture of my 15-year-old daughter with an Israeli flag at the gates of Auschwitz. Nothing better signifies the perpetual battles that we have fought for generation after generation, and will continue to fight forever, the battles between good and evil. But rest assured, we will continue to prevail in all of those battles. There's so many people here that are worth noting and mentioning tonight that I could use up all of my time just calling them out by name. I am truly honored to be part of such an all-star lineup, which includes many of Israel's greatest friends. And I'm truly honored to share this podium with all of you. I've often said that being appointed the United States Ambassador to the State of Israel is the greatest honor of my life. The United States, the nation of my birth, the nation of my citizenship, is simply the greatest and most successful experiment in self-governance that the world has ever seen. And for the Jewish people, with very rare and unfortunate exceptions, the United States has offered safe haven and boundless opportunity like nowhere else in the history of the diaspora. Israel is the nation of my faith. It is the land of the Holy Bible. It is where Jewish history began and where Jewish history continues to be made each and every day as the only democracy and America's closest ally in the Middle East. No loyal American need ever apologize for loving Israel and urging our government to support it. Support support for Israel is a quintessential American value. And so having the mandate from the president to strengthen the relationship between Israel and the United States is simply the opportunity of a lifetime, and a day does not go by where I do not thank God and seek his guidance regarding this extraordinary mission. We came into office on the heels of perhaps the greatest betrayal of Israel by a sitting president in American history. The failure by the United States in December of last year to veto United Nations Security Council Resolution 2334. Imagine a resolution stating that the Western Wall is illegally occupied territory, and unthinkably in my lifetime, in the lifetime of my parents and those that I hold dear, unthinkably the United States abstained and permitted that resolution to pass. And then a day later, the Secretary of State's attempts to justify this outrage only compounded the problem and revealed a stunning rejection of America's most important Middle Eastern ally. I hope you agree with me that we have turned a page since the dark days of last December. Gone are the days when the United Nations bashes Israel with impunity. Let UNESCO falsely disclaim once again the 3,500-year connection between the Jewish people and Jerusalem or Hebron. This time around, the result was strikingly different. The United States withdrew from UNESCO. And Ambassador Nikki Haley, there is truly a new sheriff in town down the block in Turtle Bay. But that's not the only stark change for the better in the Trump administration. In May of this past year, there were two firsts that you may have noticed. Earlier that month, I had the privilege to be the master of ceremonies at the very first Yom HaAtzmaut celebration at the White House, hosted by Vice President Mike Pence. Later that month, and far more striking, President Trump became the first sitting president in history to visit the Kotel HaMa'aravi, the Western Wall. A visit that resonated throughout the Middle East. I should also tell you that the day before President Trump arrived, I was the first United States ambassador in American history to attend the celebration of Yom Yerushalayim, the celebration of the reunification of Jerusalem. I think we're making progress. I think so. But that progress is much more than symbolic. If you ask Prime Minister Netanyahu, what are the three most important foreign policy objectives of his government, what he will tell you is Iran, Iran, and Iran. This is not the same thing as saying location, location, location when you're talking about real estate. In Iran, there are three independent things to be concerned about. Iran as a nuclear power that threatens to annihilate Israel. Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism through Hezbollah and other proxies. And Iran as a regional superpower expanding through Iraq, Syria, and Yemen and filling the vacuum created by the defeat of ISIS. As the president confronted the decision last month of whether or not to certify that the JCPOA was in the best interest of the United States, so many nations around the world came out in support of the deal. North America, South America, Europe, Asia, all the nations of the world came out in support of the deal, with one notable exception: the State of Israel. And with whom did the president side on this extraordinarily important issue? The State of Israel. Let me be clear on this extraordinary important point. There is no daylight between the United States and Israel on the critical importance of arresting the development of Iran's arsenal and ending its sponsorship of rogue regimes. Now, as you know, the president is committed to seeking a peaceful resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but never in a way that ever jeopardizes the security of the State of Israel. The president recognizes the critical importance that Judea and Samaria never become another failed experiment like we saw in the Gaza Strip. The president knows that Judea and Samaria are not situated next to Finland or Costa Rica. And perhaps most importantly, you will never hear the president make the case, as his predecessor did, that there is some symmetrical relationship between, let's say, building a house in the Samarian village of Chalamish and the brutal murder of a father, a son, and a daughter in Chalamish at a Shabbat table. There is no equivalence, none whatsoever. The president has also made clear that he intends to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when, and I take the president at his word, and I am personally committed to do all that I can to advocate for this move. I have a magnificent home owned by the government in Herzliya. It's absolutely magnificent. You can't believe how gorgeous this house is. I would give it up in a nanosecond in order to move to Jerusalem. The United States government treats Israel the way it deserves to be treated, as a critical, strategic, and trusted ally in one of the world's toughest neighborhoods. To emphasize this point, let me provide you with just a partial list of the members of the administration that I've had the privilege to greet in Israel in the 6 months that I've been on post. President Trump, Secretary of State Tillerson, Defense Secretary James Mattis, Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, who I had Shabbat dinner with in my house just 2 weeks ago, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, CIA Director Mike Pompeo, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates, NSA Director Admiral Mike Rogers, Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley, Chief Economic Advisor Gary Cohn, Deputy National Security Advisor Dina Powell, Senior Advisor Stephen Miller, and this Hanukkah we'll be welcoming Vice President Mike Pence. Many others have come as well, and of course, on frequent occasions, I'm joined by my colleagues, Senior Advisor Jared Kushner and Special Envoy Jason Greenblatt. My friends, Jared Kushner, who leads our negotiations, has a deep commitment to the State of Israel, unlike any other official ever assigned to this task. He is the grandson of Holocaust survivors. He doesn't just understand the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship, he feels it profoundly within his heart. So you don't just have every senior member of the administration traveling 6,000 miles to a tiny state on the other side of the world if it's not a critical ally, and of course it is. I have been committed to the safety, security, and prosperity of the State of Israel all of my adult life. President Trump was well aware of that commitment when he formally nominated me on the day of his inauguration, the earliest possible date that my nomination could be submitted. And he did all that he could to ensure that I was the first bilateral ambassador approved by the Senate, and I was. The Prime Minister of Israel and I both agree that we have turned the page on the relationship between Israel and the United States. It is a change decidedly for the better. Please join with me in the years to come as we continue to strengthen and enhance the unbreakable bonds of these two great nations. Thank you so much.
Beautiful speech, David. Really, really beautiful.
Before we bring up our next esteemed award recipient and our next esteemed presenter, who I've known both of them for some time. For me, as I mentioned earlier, it's very sentimental and very moving to be here. I'm not Jewish, but my father was Polish Catholic. And my father grew up right outside of the Warsaw Ghetto. And I'll just tell you very briefly of the importance of Israel in my life and of the Jewish population. My father decided to stay and fight, and he could have escaped. He was there literally in Warsaw when the Nazis invaded, when the Germans invaded. And he was 13, he saw the planes hovering above and decided to stay. Think about this, at the age of 13, decided to stay and fight. Thank you. My father gave a great line that he told me in his final years and said, "I would rather die with friends than live with strangers. Poland and freedom is worth saving." And he decided to do it voluntarily, which is amazing, because my father's family had connections in Switzerland. They could have been snuck out. And he said, "No, I am staying and fighting." And my father, at a very early age, was feeding Jewish citizens who were coming to the house. He was trying to get into the Warsaw Ghetto to pull people out of the ghetto because he could see what was happening. And people don't realize what an incredible sacrifice that is, because had they found my father, even as a teenager, feeding bread to a Jewish Polish citizen, they would have killed everybody in the house. And I think about how incredible it is and how proud I am that my grandparents obviously taught him well, because they taught him to stand up for the Jewish people and for all good people throughout the world. And I am so, so proud of that. Thank you. My father became part of the Polish resistance and then was ultimately taken prisoner. And my father was taken to Stalag 4B. He had been hit with a mortar shell and was near death's door. And his last vision of Poland, and many of you have relatives, many of you are Polish here in the room. Thank you, absolutely. Let's cheer for Poland, because it was Polish Independence Day yesterday, by the way, as well as Veterans Day. And my father's last image was a light in an attic. And he said, "Gosh, I pray that that's my parents, that they survived the war," as my father was literally being held by a Nazi guard and bleeding to death on a boxcar taken to he didn't know where. And my father ended up in Stalag 4B. My father ultimately escaped. and he was 90 pounds and 6 feet tall, one of the more healthy ones. My father was in the woods for 2.5 days. Here they were, starving prisoners of war, but they were alive. They were the lucky ones. And a plane came by. Here they are, 60 escaped Poles, clearly prisoners of war. They're in Germany. You know if they're found, they would have been just slaughtered on sight. And a plane came by, and they dove for the ditches. They thought, this is it. It's the end of the line. They figured it's a German plane. They're going to get strafed. The plane dropped something out. They thought it was a grenade, and they were in the ditches, and they just stayed there. Then the plane came by again, and they thought, this is the end of the line. This is it. And they looked up, and they saw a star, and they realized it was an American plane and not a German plane. And what was dropped out, and I think about what this must have been like, because here it is, Veterans Day weekend, and how appropriate and how beautiful, Morton, that you're having it on this weekend of all times. Because what was dropped out was not a grenade, but it was a chocolate bar with a note wrapped around, tied with a red ribbon around that chocolate bar. And it was sent from the American pilot, looking at these 60 starving prisoners of war, including my father. And the note said, "Welcome. It's safe to walk now during daytime. There are no German troops between you and our American lines. Go 15 miles and you are free." And so my father was rescued by the US military, and I always thought what that must have been like. Here it was, my dad, 90 pounds, 6 feet tall, comes to a riverbed, and what he saw was a mirage. It was American troops. And my father, like many of you in the room, like many of your parents, he couldn't speak English. All he could say was thank you. But I think that that's what epitomizes tonight, how lucky we are to be Americans and how much we have to make sure that what happened in the Holocaust, and as Ambassador Friedman and so many of you have so eloquently described, that that never happens in the world again. Absolutely. We must stand up for freedom, and we must stand up for this important, beautiful relationship between the US and Israel. My father, at the end of his life, we did a best-selling book together, which some of you know about in the room, which was an incredible journey. But I just found out a few months ago that that light in the attic was not my grandparents. It was a bunch of Jewish fighters who were hiding in my grandparents' house. Think about that in World War II. That whole village would have been slaughtered, and my grandparents had Jewish fighters hiding in the attic while my dad was in the camp. So that makes me very, very proud and very honored to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you for letting me share this night with you.
At 5 o'clock on the evening of November 8th, 2016, Jared Kushner came down into the kind of war room we had set up with the data center that we were watching the data come in from the vote. We got the early exit polls. We were even in, I think, Iowa and Ohio. We were losing by huge margins in virtually every other state. Now, when I had come onto the campaign on August 14th, we helped refine the president's message. By the way, we had the finest candidate since Ronald Reagan and one of the greatest public speakers, if not best political orator, since William Jennings Bryan and Donald J. Trump. In refining the message that President Trump, or candidate Trump at the time, had talked about, we said, destroy the physical caliphate of ISIS, designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, decertify and renegotiate the Iran deal, and move the embassy to Jerusalem. We were down at that time about 16 points. We were losing in every, I guess, significant battleground state by double digits. So on the evening of the 8th, for one short moment, Jared and I looked at each other and said, we thought we had this. To a 100% degree of metaphysical certitude, we thought we had it. The mainstream media got those exit polls and were, the opposition party over here were high-fiving and dancing around the newsrooms. They were looking at the biggest landslide in American political history. At 9:15, the Detroit Free Press called the state of Michigan for Hillary Clinton. At 10:56, the Associated Press called Ohio for Donald J. Trump. At 10:50, they called the state of Florida for Donald J. Trump. At 11:11, they called the state of North Carolina for Donald J. Trump. At 12:02 a.m. on the 9th, they called the state of Iowa for Donald J. Trump. And at 12:15 at night, the opposition party, Detroit Free Press, put the state of Michigan back in the neutral column. It was at that moment we knew, with our data, that Donald J. Trump, the strongest supporter of Israel since Ronald Reagan, was going to be the President of the United States. At 1:35, Pennsylvania fell. At 2:29, Wisconsin fell. And at 2:30, the Associated Press designated Donald J. Trump as President-elect of the United States. That victory would not have come without one other person besides Donald Trump, Sheldon Adelson. It is not about resources. It's about counsel, guidance, and wisdom. You got to remember, folks, we were down by double digits almost the entire time. And when we closed the gap and finally got within shouting distance, Billy Bush weekend happened. And you know what most of the establishment Republicans do when things get tough. They cut and they run. Sheldon Adelson didn't cut and run. Sheldon Adelson had Donald Trump's back. Sheldon Adelson offered guidance and counsel and wisdom of how to get through it. He was there for Donald Trump about how to comport oneself and how to dig down deep. And it was his guidance and his wisdom to help get us through. Shortly after noon, on the 20th of January of 2017, President Trump said, "We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism." Which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. President Trump, when he wrote those words in mid-December, knew what he was saying because it was talked about internally a lot. Which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. President Trump knew that 100 years from now, that inaugural speech will be looked at and studied. And look what he did. In the first 9 or 10 months of his administration, he destroyed the physical caliphate of ISIS. People forget. And the opposition party will never tell you, because the geniuses on Morning Joe every morning tell you, President Trump's just following through on Barack Obama's plan. Yeah, I don't remember ISIS being eradicated on his watch. In 2014, ISIS had 8 million people under their reign. They had oil revenues, tax revenues, wheat fields. It was one of the largest, most productive countries in the Middle East. And in the first 9 months of President Trump's administration, it's eradicated. The second thing he did was to call the Arab and Muslim Summit. And what was the purpose of that? Number one, to talk about we're going to stop the games that everybody's playing on financing radical Islamic terrorism in the West, in Europe, in the United States. We're going to work with you, but it's your responsibility, work with you to modernize Islam, to moderate Islam. And we're going to start to work together to stop the expansion of Iran, not just in the Middle East, but throughout the rest of the world. And look at the results. Several weeks later, in an area that's not known for bold action by its participants, correct? There's very little black and white there. There's very little bold action. Look what the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia did at Qatar. The reason is, at Qatar, you got the financing of Hamas, the financing of the Muslim Brotherhood, and with their buddies in Iran, the financing of Hezbollah. Finally, somebody took a stand. And then when they said, oh, the House of Saudi Arabia is just as bad, look at the action they've taken in the last couple of weeks. Look what MBS, look what a brave young man is doing in his own country. But as the storm clouds are arising in the Middle East, and they're arising right now, I don't think we've ever had a more dangerous time, Mort, as we've had, as we have right now. We're leading an insurgency movement against the Republican establishment and against the permanent political class in Washington, D.C. And I understand here in this room that doesn't sit well with everybody, and I don't expect it to. But if I can say one thing about ZOA and about the work that Mort, Klein, and everybody does in Washington, is you're unapologetic about the defense of the state of Israel. And there are so many games being played by the establishment, right? They've lowered the bar of what that's supposed to be. You get double dealt all the time. That's how you get the Iran deal. And that's how we still allow the American government to finance people that have blood on their hands of innocent Jewish civilians. Until Taylor Force is passed, until the Iran deal is totally decertified, torn up, and renegotiated, the establishment is just tapping along the Jewish community in this country and our partners in Israel. It is time for us to act. And I believe the only way to act is not through moderation. I am not a moderate. I'm a fighter. And that's why I'm proud to stand with the state of Israel. That's why I'm proud to be a Christian Zionist. That's why I'm proud to be a partner to one of the greatest nations on earth and the foundation of the Judeo-Christian West. We have a long, dark valley to go through, folks. Iran, Turkey, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood. The Middle East right now is on a knife's edge. It's going to take strong leadership. The pressure President Trump is under in Washington, D.C., as the radical left tries to nullify, and they're trying to nullify, the 2016 election. Great minds like Professor Dershowitz and others, I think, would agree with me. President Trump needs our back. We're a nation at war. And this war is only going to be won if we bind together and work as partners. I'm proud to be here tonight. I'm honored. I want to thank you. And I'm proud to be a Christian Zionist. Thank you.
He is a stalwart friend of the state of Israel, and it's my honor to introduce to you Senator Tom Cotton.
Well, thank you all. Thank you so much. Ron, thank you for that very kind introduction. Thank you all for the warm welcome. It's a real honor to be here celebrating the 120th anniversary of the Zionist Organization of America. It's a privilege to again share the stage with another valiant defender of Israel, the one and only Mort Klein. You know, that introduction, your welcome, was so kind. It kind of makes me feel like the beloved rabbi who was on his deathbed. You know the story. He was surrounded by 4 students. The first one of them said, "Oh, woe is us. How will we study the Torah without rabbis learning?" The second one said, woe is us. How will we learn Talmud without the rabbi's brilliance? The third one said, oh, woe is us. How will we understand the prophets without rabbi's insight? The fourth one said, oh, woe is us. How will we survive without the rabbi's generosity? And then the four students fell silent. At which point the old rabbi sat up in the bed and said, what, nothing about my humility? But I won't stretch my luck, unlike that rabbi. After all, it's a pretty humbling thing to receive an award named for the Adelsons. Where to begin? There's the breadth of their philanthropy, drug clinics, cancer research, education programs. There's the depth of it, millions and millions every single year. But if you look behind it at what motivates their magnanimity, I'd suggest it's the age-old love of human freedom. In Thucydides' history, Pericles says that the secret to happiness is freedom, and the secret to freedom is courage. And not just courage on the battlefield, though that's the highest form of the virtue. It's the daily courage to take a risk, to strive, maybe to fail. That's the secret of freedom and happiness, too. Miriam and Sheldon discovered that secret a long time ago. Sheldon started his first business when he was 12 years old. Miriam still dons her white doctor's coat to save lives. It's that love of freedom, of standing on your own 2 feet, that gets them going every morning. It animates their philanthropy to help their fellow man escape the bonds of addiction and illness and ignorance, to achieve freedom, and with it, happiness. And it's this love of freedom, I'd suggest, that's at the root of their deep affection and our deep affection for 2 special nations, America and Israel. Our special friendship is no accident of history, nor a mere alignment of interests. There's a reason the second largest Jewish metropolitan area in the world after Tel Aviv is New York. There's a reason the pilgrims called America the New Zion. Both of our nations stand as beacons of freedom in a dangerous world. And even before modern Israel was founded, there was a special bond between America and the Jewish people, because America welcomed the Jewish people and didn't feel threatened by their heritage or their success. The same can't be said, sadly, about the old world. There, the demands of the nation-state too often clashed with the heritage of the Jewish people. You could belong to one or the other, but not both. But in America, you could belong to both. America is, after all, a nation of immigrants, just like Israel is today. Here, we don't think you have to abandon your heritage to be a loyal American. And in fact, it's the freedom to be a Jew that causes the Jewish people to love America even more. The Jewish people have embraced this country with the zeal of a convert. They've made so many contributions to American life, everything from George Gershwin's musicals to Jonas Salk's polio vaccine to Levi Strauss's blue jeans. It's hard to imagine America today without the Jewish people. They preserved the Jewish way of life while shaping the American way of life. And that's because they saw no contradiction between being a proud Jew and being a proud American. Just consider how many of our favorite Christmas carols were written by Jewish composers. I mean, Irving Berlin wrote not only White Christmas, but also God Bless America. And his own tribute to the Jewish state, simply entitled Israel. And of course, the American people have never seen a contradiction in the Jewish people's love for the United States and their love for their ancient biblical homeland. In their mind, just as America would be the home of people from all walks of life, who yearn for the freedom that comes with self-government, Israel would be the home again of the Jewish people, who for 2,000 years yearned to govern themselves in freedom again. And that is one reason why your past chairman, Louis Brandeis, said, to be good Americans, we must be better Jews, and to be better Jews, we must become Zionists. So ours was a natural kinship from the beginning. Both peoples settled the land, working and sweating to build up their countries. Just as Virginia colonists hacked their way through the swamps of Jamestown, the Jewish pioneers hacked their way through the swamps of the Jezreel Valley. Just as the Pilgrims scratched down a living on the rocky soil of New England, the Jewish Legion veterans made a desert bloom. And once they settled the lands, both people fought valiantly to claim their freedom. When you read Israel's Declaration of Independence with its stirring promise to protect freedom and equal citizenship for all, you encounter the spirit of America's Declaration of Independence. When you learn about Israel's War of Independence, you can't help but hear the echoes of the American Revolution. Just as Sam Adams thundered in favor of independence, Zev Jabotinsky sounded a clarion call for a Jewish state. Just as Alexander Hamilton joined the New York militia to defend his home state, Moshe Dayan defended his country's capital by commanding the Jerusalem front. And just as the American people revere George Washington, the Israeli people revere their own founding father, David Ben-Gurion. The improbability of it all, the sheer tenacity, it is truly amazing. Here in America, a ragtag bunch of colonists defeated and humbled the world's greatest empire. And the Jewish people, after 2,000 years of suffering and persecution and near extermination, simply said, we are not taking it anymore. We will fight for our freedom and we will take back our home. And they did it. Talk about chutzpah. As Golda Meir would later say, my people should not need expressions of sympathy anymore. And indeed, the people of Israel don't need sympathy today. They inspire respect among their friends and fear among their enemies. Israel has again assumed its rightful place among the proud nations of the world. And both of our countries are strong and free, so our kinship is indeed natural and our alliance is just. I'm proud of what we accomplished together, not just for our own people, but also for mankind. After all, only the strong can protect the weak, and only the strong can afford to be kind. And too often in this world, only the strong can speak the truth. So let us speak some plain truths about the Jewish people and the Holy Land. Israel is and always will be the home of the Jewish people. And much as we might celebrate its recent centenary, the Balfour Declaration did not establish Israel as the home of the Jewish people. God did when He promised that land to Abraham. And that land included Judea and Samaria. After all, Jews are called Jews because they're from Judea. And the capital of Israel is and always will be Jerusalem. Now, I know that these truths may offend some of Israel's detractors, but they're no less truth because of it. And the Zionist Organization of America knows that speaking the truth is the foundation of progress, security, and peace. Your organization has long defended the truth, and it's an honor to receive your award for being a fellow defender of Israel. Though I have to say, I'm not so sure Israel needs as much defending these days as it once did. A few years back, I was part of a small delegation to Israel. We met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He urged the United States to challenge Iran to stop its nuclear program, to roll back its campaign of imperial aggression across the Middle East. One American expressed worry for Israel. What if Hezbollah retaliates? Bibi said, "Don't worry about Israel. Israel can defend itself." And that's the spirit of freedom and strength speaking. It's the spirit you hear from time to time among Israeli security and intelligence types. Kahal Lavan, blue and white, we rely on ourselves. And that's an admirable and proud spirit. And it's enough for almost all of the challenges Israel faces, many of which we've heard about tonight. But there is one unique challenge where blue and white must never be compelled to stand alone, and that's a nuclear-armed Iran. Because that outlaw regime is willing to trade death by the millions to destroy Israel. There's a reason they inscribe Israel must be wiped out on their missiles. Israel is the home to many thousands of Muslims, yet the Ayatollahs would burn it all down if they could rule the ashes. Red, white, and blue, therefore, must stand alongside blue and white to defeat this threat from Iran. We are in this fight together all the way to the end. Remember, the Ayatollahs chant death to America and death to Israel. I've been in that fight for a long time myself. When I was a platoon leader in Iraq, my soldiers were at the mercy of fortune to avoid roadside bombs made by Iran. Fortunately, we did, but hundreds and hundreds of American troops died from those bombs. Later, in the Senate, I opposed the Iran nuclear deal from the start, as I know all of you did as well. You may recall that I posted a letter to the Ayatollahs, warning them that a future president and Congress wouldn't accept that foolhardy deal. Maybe they should have listened to me. I was the lone vote in the Senate against a law that, though well-intentioned, bypassed the constitutional processes for ratifying treaties, and then I traveled to Vienna and exposed Iran's secret side deals with the IAEA. And now that we have a president who sees Iran for the threat it is, I'm working with him and my colleagues to change that law, stop Iran from going nuclear, and protect the United States and Israel. So, please pray that our efforts succeed, that we stop this threat peacefully. But let there be no doubt about this point. If we are forced to take action, the United States can totally destroy Iran's nuclear infrastructure. And if they choose to rebuild it, we could destroy it again until they get the picture. This challenge is daunting, but then again, our two nations have never ducked a challenge. You might say we rise to them. I'm reminded of the story of an old Jewish musician who left his home in Leipzig in 1937, well into Hitler's rule, to join a small settlement in Israel. Those were the days of the Mandate. And one day, a group of British officials recognized the man from his performances at the British Embassy in Berlin. One official expressed sympathy to the man, saying to him, "This is a terrible change for you." The man replied, "It is a change from hell to heaven." My friends, that's the kind of stuff our two nations and our two peoples are made of. To borrow from another great Zionist, Winston Churchill, we have not journeyed all this way across the centuries, across the oceans, across the mountains, and across the prairies because we are made of sugar candy. we are made of much tougher stuff. There were plenty of bleak times in the American Revolution, just as there have been many times when Israel was locked in a seemingly hopeless war. Yet here we stand, stronger than ever, two modern-day Davids prevailing against all the odds. How can one read the histories of our two nations and fail to see the hand of providence guiding the affairs of man? In the struggle between good and evil, between righteousness and wickedness, between freedom and slavery, take your resolution with the knowledge that He is not neutral. And let us all be confident that after all is said and done, after all the ups and downs, Zion and the new Zion will prevail in that struggle, and freedom will not perish from this earth. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless Israel and America.
Would you give a big round of applause to Mort and Klein and the ZOA? What an incredible evening.
What an incredible honor I have standing with America's ambassador to the State of Israel, David Friedman. First of all, thank you for all your service. And your words tonight were extraordinary. Look, what's it feel like to stand in front of a ZOA dinner and speak about the difference between this administration and the administration that preceded it? And there's something historic, David, in terms of what you and the Trump administration now are doing. And a lot of Jews don't like Trump, and it doesn't matter. What you're doing is important for the Jewish people. And, you know, we've never had a chance to talk before. I'm asking in general, how does it feel?
It's a tremendous responsibility, and I take it very seriously. Obviously, the ability to have this position is something that goes well beyond my wildest dreams. I only wish, the truth is, I only really wish that my father, Oliver Shalom, who was a prominent rabbi for almost 50 years, that he could have lived to see it.
And your mother?
And my mother, as I told you, my mother is, unfortunately 90 years old and bedridden, but your show gives her a lot of pleasure every day, and she really appreciates it.
That's lovely for me to hear.
And I want to thank you for that.
Thank you. I have one hard question for you.
Sure.
I've never had anybody answer this effectively to me. I hear the way you describe the way your administration is trying to approach the State of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
It is so clear to me. Forget you're being Jewish. You're just an intelligent individual looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You see a culture which has no interest in even sitting down, and that tells us that if there is peace one day, the West Bank, the new Palestinian state, will be Judenrein. I don't understand why administration after administration, I'm not talking now even about presidents or ambassadors, I'm talking about the State Department. How is it possible that intelligent professionals don't get it, administration after administration after administration? David, it is unfathomable to me. Do you have an answer?
I don't have an excuse for the past sins of the State Department, certainly. Look, there's a certain calcification that I think took place there generations ago that we're trying to break. And we're trying to look at this, I think, a little bit differently. Nobody certainly is guaranteeing a different outcome. It's very challenging. There are Palestinian people who are disserved by their leadership, who want a better life and are entitled to a better life. And of all the governments in the world that want to give the Palestinians a better life, the Israeli government ranks number one. And so this is, in a certain sense, not as contentious or controversial as it need be. The question is, when will the Palestinian leadership begin to serve their own people and pursue their legitimate dreams? And look, we want to fertilize the ground for that possibility, but we're holding no illusions.
No illusions. Before you became ambassador, did you think it was possible for there to be an Israeli-Palestinian peace at this time in history? Before you became ambassador?
No.
When you become ambassador, do you learn things that you didn't know before that we, the average public, would not know? Did you learn anything that changed your mind?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I have the benefit of, it's night and day what I know now than what I knew 6-7 months ago. Look, the most important thing in this entire approach is do no harm to Israel. Start with that. Sort of the medical doctrine, right? Do no harm. All right, so we need to understand what Israel needs, what their requirements are, and then we try to see within that if we can forge something that's appealing to moderate Palestinians. We don't accept the premise that every Palestinian is evil, that every Palestinian hates Jews. The reality is that, even in Judea and Samaria, there's a lot of interaction, a lot of commerce. We have to draw that out. That's what we're trying to do, to draw it out. A lot of that really doesn't get reported because, people put themselves at risk in the Palestinian world by being, associated or aligned with the state of Israel. But it's there. We've got to find ways to draw it out and protect it and nurture it. And it's not impossible. It's a really difficult thing to accomplish. But look, what would you have said about Northern Ireland, 50 years ago, whatever? These things ultimately do get resolved. We have to make sure.
It is wonderful hearing you say it.
Well, look, there's nothing more important to me than protecting Israel and its alliance with the United States. The question is, can we accomplish something that's in Israel's best interests, that's also in the Palestinians' best interests?
Last question.
Yeah.
Will the embassy be moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem during Donald Trump's first 4 years in office?
I'm pretty confident that it will, yes.
You're doing fabulous work. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for some time.
Thank you.
One day I want to sit with you on L'chaim, and you give my warmest regards to your mother, all right?
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank
David
you.
Friedman.
Thank you.
At the ZOA dinner, I'm standing with Ken Abramowitz, who of course has been one of the major Jewish forces and supporting the state of Israel and also supporting the Jewish people. So Ken, what was your reaction to tonight's dinner? You have been aligned with the Republican Party, with conservative causes. You've been on JBS discussing it from that perspective. There was something, on the one hand, I felt reaffirming of Steve Bannon. David Friedman spoke beautifully. At the same time, there were Democrats here on the stage, and there was something sort of inclusive about tonight. What especially impressed you as you watched speaker after speaker come up here on the rostrum?
Well, every speaker was excellent. It's not often that every speaker is excellent. And you're right, it wasn't just a Republican event. It was a Republican and Democrat event. It was an Israel event,
yes.
Which shouldn't really be political. It's become a political issue. It shouldn't be. Israel is the foundation of Western civilization, and in America is the most important force in Western civilization. There really should be a bipartisan love fest with Israel for two reasons. One, because of Israel and its importance to the Jews. The second reason is Israel's importance to the Christians. Israel protects the Christians. It's the eastern border of Western civilization, and it has to remain strong.
What did you think of the comments of Ambassador Friedman, David Friedman?
Well, David Friedman tried to emphasize the differences between President Obama and President Trump, and the differences are vast. He would say we should be grateful that we have President Trump, and I would agree with him. And he doesn't want daylight between Israel and America. President Obama publicly said he wanted daylight. So I'd say it's very refreshing start of the administration, but they still have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Do you know Steve Bannon personally?
Yeah, I know him. I've talked with him for just a small period of time, 5-10 minutes, but he's a great thinker. We had a very good time together. I met him just after President Trump became
So what did you think
elect-
of his comments tonight?
Oh, Bannon's just wonderful. He understands the picture. He said we're in war. I mean, I say we're in World War III. He just said we're in war. Since we had World War I and II, I guess he would have said we were in World War III. And we have to treat it as a war. And we have to win. One of the challenges is democracies in general try to tie. Bad guys in general try to win. So when you have democracies trying to compromise and tie and bad guys wanting to win, you can see why it leads to conflict.
Yes. I've asked you this before, but in the context of tonight, I want you to speak about it again. Within the Jewish world, Jewish America, what they estimate is roughly 70% vote Democrat. The Jewish community of America is basically a liberal community, and there is a lot of pure animosity, or worse, within the Jewish community for Donald Trump and for Steve Bannon and for David Friedman, because he's disappointed by Donald Trump, and he is very strong in saying that ultimately Israel is in the right, and there is no moral equivalency, and on and on and on. What do you say to those? They must be friends of yours also. Intelligent, well-meaning. I'm not talking now about the far left, no crazies. I'm talking about good people who are in the liberal democratic tradition of the Jewish people, American Jewry. What do you say to them when they say to you, oh, you know, you're supporting a fascist, you're supporting a bigot, you're supporting a racist, Donald Trump's the worst thing that's ever happened to America, Steve Bannon is an anti-Semite, and Breitbart is racist, and Bannon and Breitbart are one and the same, and ZOA, for even having them, is a right-wing organization that does not deserve the general kind of respect that other mainstream organizations, AJC, ADL, have. What's your reaction to that, and what's your answer?
I would say that Democrats have two misconceptions. One is they've made Trump into a monster by accusing him of things that he's not. So they accuse him of being a racist, anti-women, anti-immigrants, anti-everything you can think of. They build him up to be a monster, and then they go, oh, I'm afraid of him, he's a monster. I said, wait a minute, you created this monster, but that's not true. You just gave him attributes that he does not emulate. That's one issue. The second issue is Democrats don't understand evil. The reason they don't understand evil is that good people think everyone is good. So why would someone be evil? But there is evil in the world. The number one source of evil is what I call political Islam, the politicization of a religion. And I divide it up into physical terrorists and cultural terrorists. So the Democrats don't understand the mortal threat from political Islam. And so those would be their two misconceptions. It should be fixable over time.
Last question. Are you optimistic now about both America's future, Israel's future, and as you look at it, because you're an observer of the entire global situation, are you optimistic for the world as a whole?
Yes, I'm optimistic in the sense of if you had asked me this question in the late 30s and you said, am I optimistic, and pretend that I could forecast the future, I would say I'm very optimistic about the future because the forces of evil are going to attack us because we're fat, dumb, and happy. And then we, the West, will rise up and destroy the forces of evil. And so therefore I'm an optimist. So I would say the same thing. We're in World War III right now. We're in the equivalent of 1937. The forces of evil are surrounding us. We're fat, dumb, and happy. They will overstep their bounds. We will then react and win. So I'm optimistic that we will win. I'm just concerned that we have to go through Pearl Harbor 9/11 again, which I don't want to go through.
It is always wonderful talking to you and sharing thoughts with you. Have to get you back in the studio as soon as possible.
Whenever you want.
But I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Ken Abramowitz. Lucky me, I'm standing now with Rita Cosby, who has been the mistress of ceremonies here. You were out of this world.
Oh my goodness!
And everyone
Thank you.
loved you.
Thank you.
But wait, how did you end up doing this?
You know what? I knew, of course, ZOA. I've interviewed Mort Klein, the national president, of course, a couple times on my show. And
on Fox.
On Fox and also elsewhere, too, on radio, a number of places. And Liz Clayman, who's a dear friend of mine, said, would you come? And as soon as I found out what the organization was, and especially given where we are in the world right now, the importance of appreciating Israel, the importance of appreciating the heroes of freedom, I said, absolutely. And for me, it was my gift to be here tonight. It was such a blessing.
By the way, you were beloved. You know that. You could see that by all the people who came up.
Thank you.
And the story you told about your father, which we've just seen, is just marvelous. And one day you and I will sit and we'll talk in more detail. But who are you? Who are you, Rita Cosby? Who are you?
Someone who appreciates freedom. Someone who I'm very proud of my father's past and my mother's past, but my father was a Polish resistance fighter who grew up right outside the Warsaw Ghetto. And my father decided to help those inside and those outside. And my father,
where did you grow up?
I grew up, actually, I was born in Brooklyn and spent time in New York and also in Greenwich, Connecticut. And, you know, for me, I've always been one of those people, and I think I got it, especially from my father, to fight for justice and fight for freedom. And my father, even as a Polish Catholic, and you understand the great sacrifice, my father felt if you were a good citizen of Poland where he was growing up, he was going to do all he could to help you. And now with some of these new discoveries in my own family's history, it makes me very proud. And I feel like Israel plays such a critical role, not just for ZOA, but for the world. And it's been my honor to be able to showcase that in any way I can.
Well, you did something very beautiful tonight. You should be very proud. There's a saying in Hebrew called Tu v'hatzlacha, which means you should have continued success in all you do and all goodness. And tonight, everybody in this room felt that way for you, and I feel that way for you.
Thank you.
And I look forward to other opportunities sitting with you in person.
Good.
But tonight, well done, sweetheart. Very well done.
Thank you. And God bless you, and God bless ZOA, and God bless Israel.
Thank you. Rita Cosby. So there you have it. One fabulous evening here at the ZOA Gala 2017. And I'm standing with the man who really made it all possible and who guides this organization, Mort Klein. Was it thrilling for you as it was for everybody in this room?
I believe, I will immodestly state, this was the greatest one-night Jewish dinner in the history of Jewish organizations.
Because?
Never have such a way of the top most distinguished activists, senators, congressmen from both the Democrats and the Republican side espousing the truth of the Arab-Islamic war against Israel and why we must do everything we can to ensure Israel's safety and security against the horrors of the Arab-Muslim world and the Jew haters around the world, which are growing.
Yes. So I'm going to mention a couple of people here who I thought were outstanding. I want your reaction. First of all, David Friedman, America's ambassador to Israel. I thought he was out of this world. What were you thinking as you heard him?
I was thinking no other ambassador to Israel would ever have given the speech David Friedman did. He is truly the most sincerely committed and lucidly clear-thinking ambassador we ever had about what Israel faces. And I thought of all the names of the other ambassadors, from Dan Kurtzer, Martin Indyk, and the others, I'll name names, they would never have said these things. All they are apologists for the Palestinian Arabs refusing to see the truth.
Incidentally, you know, he made it sound like Jared Kushner is really in there fighting for Israel at the moment. What was your reaction to that?
Look, Jared Kushner obviously sincerely cares about Israel. I think he's making a serious mistake in pushing for negotiations now. They should be predicated on the Palestinian Authority ending paying Arabs to murder innocent Jews, rescinding all the names of schools, streets, and sports teams named after Jew killers, and rescinding the alliance they've made with a Nazi-like Hamas organization. So I think he's pushing toward an impossible deal that will fail. So I don't agree with Jared, even though I absolutely respect his deep commitment to Israel.
Very good. Steve Bannon, also perhaps the most controversial person you've ever had at a ZOA dinner. He spoke, by the way, very forcefully. I want to know what Mort Klein was thinking when Steve Bannon was up here.
I thought how horrific it is that the media and the Jewish organizations like ADL and others have tried to assassinate this fabulous man's character, calling him an anti-Semite and a neo-Nazi and a racist, when he's a deep lover of Israel and the Jewish people, when he opposes the likes of David Duke and the Louis Farrakhan's. And I think tonight he proved what he's really made of. And I hope it's high time that the media will finally make it clear that they respect this man as one of the great heroes of America. And also to understand that when he said that Breitbart is the home of the alt-right, he did not mean the racists and the neo-Nazis and the anti-Semites. He meant the home of the alt-right, which to him meant the anti-establishment, the anti-mainstream. That's all he meant. If you read Breitbart, you will never see racist, anti-Semitic, neo-Nazi articles. He won't let them there. And he said so in 60 Minutes on national television. I hope this will go a long way to rehabilitating the image that the media and the Jewish organizations have tried to destroy.
All right, one complicated issue for you. You have Alan Dershowitz here. Alan represents as strong a liberal position in the Jewish community for, 50 years?
Right.
He's a champion of civil rights, of human rights, and he's also
So are we.
Exactly, and a champion of Israel. And you got him here at a dinner with Steve Bannon.
Right.
And you and I know there are going to be Jews saying, oh, you see that ZOA? How could they possibly have a Steve Bannon, let alone David Friedman, because they're allied with Donald Trump? And yet, there was a larger picture here tonight. And the fact that Alan Dershowitz comes speaks also passionately. He has been vilified by the left for his pro-Israel stance and his insistence on telling the legal truth about any issue relating to Donald Trump. So I'm asking you, and I've asked you this before more in other contexts, but I want to hear it tonight because this was a very special night for you and ZOA. When you hear Jews say, and I don't mean far-left Jews, your ordinary Yidden who say, you know what, the ZOA is a problem. It's on the far right. Mort Klein's on the far right. He has Steve Bannon. He has David Friedman. And therefore, there's something about the organization which should not get the kind of widespread popular Jewish support. You say.
Alan Dershowitz, liberal Democrat, and Joseph Lieberman, liberal Democrat, would not be at this dinner if they thought we were extreme in any way. If they thought Bannon was an anti-Semite, they wouldn't show up in the room. So what people say about us that we're far right, it's name-calling. They can't name a single policy or position we've taken that has been inappropriate for 24 years since I'm president. We were right to oppose Oslo, saying it'll be a disaster. We were right to oppose the Gaza withdrawal, predicting it'll be a disaster. We were right to say Jews have an absolute right to live in Judea and Samaria. So tell me, which of those positions are extreme right? It's rubbish. This is simply the left who oppose our positions on Israel, and they want to demonize us and try and destroy our credibility because they never make substantive arguments against our position. They simply call names. Alan Dershowitz and Joe and Senator Lieberman wouldn't be here if they thought we were extreme right. I think that proves everything.
Well, look, you've seen Mort before. You've seen me have a conversation both in studio on the phone with him. And I feel he is one of the real heroes of modern Jewish life. You don't have to agree with every position he takes. You can't even disagree with every position he takes. But this is a man who is passionate about being Jewish, about the state of Israel. He is an Ohev Yisrael, and I am proud to be associated with you, and I'm proud to always give you a platform on JBS called Tuva Haslacha in all you
Rabbi
do,
Golub.
and fabulous night tonight. You should go home very happy and very proud.
And people should understand that truth and facts and telling the truth are not political positions. And that's what ZOA does. We are rational centrists, simply telling the truth. I would love it if we could get peace between the Palestinian Arabs and the Jews. If establishing a state would bring peace for 100 years, we, the board of ZOA, would address that issue at the time. Right now we know this is simply a vicious Jew-hating terrorist regime, the Palestinian Authority, who should get none of our monies. They're getting $500 million a year, who should get none of our support. And that's why we oppose having any negotiations with them, which, by the way, they've refused to have for 8 years anyway, until they show that they're serious about peace and not simply serious about destroying the state of Israel, which is their goal.
Mort Klein, and this has been the ZOA Gala for 2017. Mazal Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.